Agatha Christie. She was born in 1890 in Torquay, England, and wrote over 60 detective novels. Chapter 1. Why don't you write a story? Agatha was bored. It was a winter morning in 1908, and she was in bed because she was ill. The doctor told her to stay in bed and keep warm. But she was bored. Agatha was 18 years old at this time. Agatha's mother urged her to take action and do something. She suggested that Agatha could read a book or write a story. Madge was Agatha's sister. She was 11 years older than Agatha, and sometimes wrote short stories for magazines like Vanity Fair. Soon after, Agatha sat up in bed and began to write a story. It was called House of Beauty, a strange story about dreams. It wasn't a very good story. She typed it on Madge's old typewriter and sent it off to a magazine. But they sent it back with a letter. Thank you for sending us your story. We are afraid we cannot publish it. You must try again, said her mother. Clara was always sure that her daughters could do anything, so Agatha went on writing stories and sending them out to magazines, but they all came back. She was a little disappointed. An idea came to her. She remembered seeing a beautiful young girl in a hotel in Cairo when she was visiting Egypt with Clara. The girl was always with two men, one on each side of her. It was all that Agatha needed for an idea, and she began writing. It was not a detective novel. It was the story of a young girl who lived in Cairo, and it was called Snow Upon the Desert. It was really two long stories put together to make a book. When it was finished, Agatha sent it to 3 or 4 publishers, but they all sent it back. Why don't you show it to Eden Philpotts? Said Clara. Eden Philpotts was a writer who lived near the Millers. During his life, he wrote more than 100 popular novels and many plays for the theatre. Agatha was a little afraid of sending her novel to this famous man, but she agreed to do it and sent it off. Mr. Philpotts was a good writer, and also a kind man. He read Agatha's novel carefully and wrote her a letter. Some of your writing is very good, so I am sending you a letter to take to my agent, Hughes Massey. Agatha, still only 18 years old, went to London on the train. It was a long journey, more than 200 miles from her home in Torquay in Devon, and the trains were not so fast in those days. She was very shy, and Hughes Massey was a big, frightening man. Agatha gave him the letter from Eden Philpotts. Massey talked with Agatha for a while, then kept her book to read. Agatha went home to wait. Some months later, Massey returned Snow Upon the Desert to her. He couldn't find a publisher for it. The best thing is to stop thinking about it anymore and to write another book. Agatha was disappointed. She did write another book, but some other important things happened in her life first. Chapter 2. A shy young man. Agatha's father, Frederick, died in 1901, when Agatha was 11 years old. He was an American, and was 10 years older than Clara. After he died, Clara began to travel a lot, and often took Agatha with her. In 1911, when Agatha was 21, Clara was ill, so Clara decided to go to Egypt again, and she took Agatha with her. They stayed in a hotel in Cairo. There were some English soldiers staying near the hotel, and they often came to the hotel dances. Agatha was a shy young woman, but she loved to dance. During her stay in Cairo, she went to 50 dances. She met a lot of exciting young men and had a wonderful time. When she came back to England, she was soon getting invitations to garden parties, tennis parties, dances, and to country houses for the weekend. Then a young army officer called Reggie Lucy came home from Hong Kong. Agatha was a friend of Reggie's 3 sisters and often played tennis with them. But she did not know Reggie. He was a very shy young man who did not go out very much. He liked to play golf, but did not like parties or dances. So, while Reggie was in England, he and Agatha played golf nearly every day. During a round of golf on a hot day, Agatha and Reggie took a break and sat under a tree to cool down. During their conversation, Reggie unexpectedly expressed his desire to marry Agatha, acknowledging that she may still be too young for such a commitment. Agatha responds to Reggie's proposal by asserting that she is not too young to get married. Reggie flatters Agatha, saying that she could marry anyone because of her beauty. Agatha then confesses that she would like to marry Reggie. However, Reggie reveals that he must return to Hong Kong in 10 days and will be gone for 2 years. Reggie suggests that if there is nobody else when he returns, they can marry. Agatha agrees, saying that there won't be anyone else. So Reggie went back to Hong Kong. Agatha wrote letters to him, and he wrote to her. It was all agreed. When Reggie came home again, they would get married. Chapter 3. Tea at the Railway Station. On October 12, 1912, when Agatha was 22, she went to a dance at the home of Lord and Lady Clifford. They lived near Chudley, 12 miles from Torquay, and there were many young people there for Agatha to talk to. During the evening, a young army officer came up to her. He was tall and good-looking, with friendly blue eyes, and his name was Archibald Christie. Agatha liked him immediately. They danced together many times that evening, and Archie told her his plans. A week later, she was having tea with some friends at a house opposite Ashfield, her home, when there was a telephone call for her. It was her mother who asks Agatha to come home as there is a young man who has arrived and she is giving him tea. Clara does not know the man, but she thinks that he wants to see Agatha. Agatha had to leave her friends and hurry home, so she was not very pleased. But when she got home, she found Archie Christie waiting for her. He introduces himself by saying that he was in Torquay and thought it would be nice to see her. The man seems nervous, as his face is red and he avoids making eye contact by looking at his shoes. Agatha greets the man with a smile. Archie stayed for the rest of the afternoon, and for supper that evening. Before leaving, he invites Agatha to a concert in Exeter and suggests they go to the Red Cliff Hotel for tea afterwards. Agatha agrees to the invitation and asks Clara for permission. Clara consents to the concert but refuses the hotel tea proposal. Archie, who is present, suggests an alternative option of taking Agatha to tea at the restaurant in Exeter railway station. Agatha tried not to smile, but her mother agreed. So Agatha and Archie went to the concert, and then had tea at Exeter railway station. On the way home, Agatha asks Archie if he would like to come to a New Year's dance in Torquay on the 2nd of January. Archie agrees with a smile, expressing his desire to see Agatha as often as possible. But when Archie came to the New Year's dance, he was very quiet and did not seem happy. He seemed to be worried about something, but Agatha said nothing. 2 days later, on the 4th of January, 1913, they went to another concert together. Archie remains quiet throughout the concert, and Agatha notices his unusual behavior. She asks him what's wrong, and he reveals that the Royal Flying Corps has accepted him, and he must leave Exeter in 2 days to go to Salisbury. Archie confesses his love for Agatha and asks her to marry him, saying that there will never be anyone else for him. Agatha is surprised and tells Archie that she has already promised to marry Reggie Lucy. Archie questions Agatha about her feelings towards Reggie, and she reveals that they have not yet married as they thought it was better to wait. Archie expresses his desire to marry Agatha as soon as possible, but Agatha is concerned about their financial situation. However, she confesses her love for Archie to her mother, who advises them to wait as neither of them has any money. Archie goes to Salisbury, and Agatha writes a difficult letter to Reggie Lucy, explaining her situation. Reggie responds with kindness, telling Agatha that he understands and not to worry about it. Agatha and Archie wait for the right time to marry. In August 1914, England was suddenly at war with Germany. Archie went to France with the Royal Flying Corps, and Agatha went to work as a volunteer nurse at the Torbay Hospital in Torquay. Archie came back to England for 5 days in December, and Agatha went up to London to meet him. Then the two of them went down to Bristol, where Archie's mother lived. They could not wait any longer. They wanted to get married. Archie's mother was not happy about this, but Clara thought differently. Agatha's mother advises her to get married as soon as possible. So Agatha and Archie were married at last on the 24th of December, 1914. 2 days later, Archie went back to the war, and Agatha did not see him again for 6 months. During the summer of 1915, Agatha was ill and could not do any nursing work at the hospital for 3 or 4 weeks. Then, when she returned, she went to work in the hospital dispensary, and here she learned something which was very useful for a writer of detective stories. She learned about poisons. Chapter 4. A detective story. One day, sometime before the war, Agatha was talking with her sister, Madge, about detective stories. They both enjoyed reading this kind of book very much. Agatha expressed her desire to write a detective story, to which Madge responded by saying that it is a difficult task. Madge further added that Agatha couldn't do it. However, Agatha remained determined and stated that she would attempt it someday. The idea stayed in Agatha's head, and she wanted to show Madge that she could do it, and when, years later, she went to work in the hospital dispensary, she again began to think about writing a detective story. There were some Belgian people living in Torquay who were there because of the war in Belgium. Clara, like everyone in the town, was very kind and helpful to them when they arrived. She gave them chairs and beds for their homes, and tried to make them feel happy and comfortable. Now, Agatha suddenly remembered them. As she considered creating a detective character, the idea of a Belgian detective occurred to her, and she started to imagine the character in her mind. She envisioned him as an exceptionally clever and neat little man. While contemplating what to name him, she came up with the name Hercules, which she felt was a fitting name for a diminutive man. She then decided on the name Poirot for his surname, leading her to settle on the full name of Hercule Poirot. The name made her smile, and she was satisfied with her creation. Agatha thought about her detective story during every quiet minute in the dispensary. She knew a lot about poisons now. She knew which poisons worked quickly and which worked slowly. She knew how much to give and what different poisons smelt and tasted like. She knew how people died from poisons. Did their faces turn blue? Did they die in their sleep, or die screaming in pain? A good detective, and a good writer of detective stories, must know these things. She began to write her story at home, and used Madge's old typewriter again. One day, Clara asked Agatha what she was doing. Agatha replied that she was writing a detective novel, but finding it very difficult to finish. Clara suggested that Agatha should take a holiday to a nice and quiet place and take her novel with her to complete it. She asked if Agatha would like to go to Dartmoor, to which Agatha eagerly replied with a yes. Dartmoor was a beautiful, lonely moor in Devon. Agatha took Madge's typewriter with her and stayed at the Moorland Hotel at Haytor. It was a large hotel with a lot of rooms, but not many people were staying there. For 2 weeks she wrote in her room every morning, then went for long walks alone on the moor in the afternoons. Everything went well. The characters seemed to come alive inside her head, and during her walks she planned her writing for the next day. She finished the last half of the book during her holiday, and soon after, she sent it to a publisher. They returned it, but Agatha was not surprised. She sent it out again, but it came back once more. She sent it to a third publisher, but they returned it, too. Then she sent it to the Bodley Head Publishing Company, and forgot all about it. 2 years went by. Archie came back to work in London, the war ended, and Agatha had a baby, Rosalind. The 3 of them were living in a flat in London when a letter arrived one morning in 1919. It was from the Bodley Head. Agatha quickly opened the letter and saw the words, "Will you call at our offices? We would like to talk about your book." Agatha went to the publisher's office and met John Lane, a small man with white hair. He invited her to sit down, and explained that some of his readers thought that they could publish her book, but that she would need to change the last chapter and make some other small adjustments. Lane had a kind voice, and carefully looked at Agatha, with his blue eyes, while speaking to her. Agatha was too excited to listen. She was happy to do anything. So she wrote a different ending for it, and changed 1 or 2 more small things, and at last John Lane was pleased with it. Chapter 5. A Good Detective Story Writer. Agatha's first book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, was published in 1920. But before this, she began writing another book. During a conversation with Archie, Agatha mentioned that her mother was struggling to pay all the bills at Ashfield. Archie suggested that Agatha's mother could sell the house, as it was too big for one person, and use the proceeds to buy a smaller one. Agatha, however, was not keen on the idea, as Ashfield was their family home, and she loved it. Archie then suggested that Agatha should write another book, to help her mother with the financial difficulties. Agatha was curious about the idea, and asked Archie to elaborate. Archie explained that writing another book could potentially make a lot of money. One day, while having tea at a tea shop, she overheard a conversation between 2 people sitting near her. They mentioned a name, Jane Fish, which caught Agatha's attention, and she began to listen carefully to their conversation. This moment would prove to be a significant turning point for Agatha, as the name would later inspire one of her most famous characters, Miss Marple. Agatha found the name, Jane Fish, to be an interesting and unique name, and she thought that it would make a good beginning for a story. However, she decided to change the name to Jane Finn, as she believed it sounded better. As she left the tea shop, Agatha's mind was already working on developing a story idea around the name, Jane Finn. She went home and started working on the story immediately, inspired by the chance encounter at the tea shop. More and more people began to buy Agatha's books, and Agatha had more money to spend. The Christies bought a house at Sunningdale, about 30 miles from London. But not long after they moved to Sunningdale, something happened that put Agatha's name on the front pages of every newspaper in England. She disappeared. People think that it happened because she was very unhappy at this time. First, her mother died. And then, Agatha found out that Archie was in love with a young woman called Nancy Neal. Chapter 6. Agatha Disappears. On the morning of Friday, the 3rd of December, 1926, Archie left Styles and went to stay with some friends for the weekend. Nancy Neal was also staying at this house for the weekend. Perhaps Agatha knew this, perhaps she didn't, we can't be sure. Nobody knows what Agatha was thinking. Late that dark winter evening, Rosalind, now 7 years old, was in bed. The Christies' 2 housemaids were in the kitchen. At about 11 o'clock that evening, Agatha went out and drove away in her car. She did not return home that night. On Saturday morning, a woman arrived by taxi at the Hydro Hotel in Harrogate, Yorkshire. The Hydro was one of Harrogate's biggest and best hotels, near the centre of the town. The tired-looking woman, with a small suitcase, approached the hotel desk and asked for a room. The man behind the desk confirmed that there was a room available on the first floor, number 5, which had hot and cold water. The weekly cost for the room was £7. The woman agreed to take the room and provided her name as Mrs. Teresa Neal. Also on that cold Saturday morning in December, a 15-year-old boy was walking beside a lake called the Silent Pool. This was at a place called Newlands Corner, about 14 miles from Sunningdale. The boy's name was George Best. Suddenly, George saw a car. It was off the road, down by the lake, but the lights were on. The car was empty, but the driver's door was open. George looked inside. He saw a coat and an open suitcase. Half out of the suitcase were 3 dresses, some shoes, and some papers, with the name Mrs. Agatha Christie on them. George quickly went to find a policeman. The newspapers were soon full of the story, and Agatha's picture was on the front pages. By the next weekend, hundreds of policemen and thousands of people were looking for her. A reporter from the Daily Mail asked Archie if his wife ever spoke about disappearing. Archie confirmed that she had once told her sister that she could disappear. If she wanted, she would plan it carefully so that nobody could find her. Archie suggested that perhaps this is what had happened, or maybe his wife was ill and could not remember her identity. After this conversation, the police asked Archie many questions and started monitoring his movements both at home and at his office. The woman at the Hydro Hotel had breakfast in her room each morning, and sat quietly reading in the hotel sitting room in the afternoons. She said good morning and good afternoon to other people in the hotel, and seemed worried because there were no letters for her. But one of the chambermaids went to see Mrs. Taylor, the wife of the hotel manager. The chambermaid at the hotel, where Mrs. Theresa Neal was staying, thought that she looked like the woman in the Daily Mail picture, Agatha Christie. Mrs. Taylor shared this information with her husband, but they decided not to say anything to avoid any trouble. However, two other people at the Hydro Hotel, Bob Tappan and Bob Leeming, also started to pay close attention to Mrs. Theresa Neal. They played music in the hotel each evening, and watched the quiet woman in the corner of the room. One evening, Bob Tappan told his friend that he was sure that the woman was actually Agatha Christie. The next day they went to the police. The police immediately told Agatha's husband, and Archie Christie arrived at the Hydro Hotel. When his wife walked out of the sitting room, Archie saw her and went up to her. Archie tried to make conversation with Agatha, asking how she was feeling and where she had been. Agatha replied politely, but still seemed confused and disoriented. The hotel was soon full of newspaper reporters. Archie informed the police that he didn't believe his wife knew who she was, as she didn't recognize him or her surroundings. He and Agatha left the hotel the next day. There were reporters everywhere. They followed the Christies to the railway station, trying to get pictures of the frightened Agatha, who was hiding her face behind her hands. And in London, hundreds of people were waiting at King's Cross Station for the train from Harrogate. Everyone wanted to see the woman of mystery and her husband. Their lives now seemed to be like something out of one of her detective stories. Archie helped the silent, frightened Agatha through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions at them and took pictures, but neither Archie nor Agatha said a word. And for the rest of her life, Agatha never again spoke about Harrogate, the Hydro Hotel, or Theresa Neal. But what really happened that night after she left Styles? Why did she leave her car? How did she get to Harrogate? It was always a mystery. It still is. Chapter 7. A Young Archaeologist. During the first weeks of 1927, Agatha went to stay with Madge and her husband in Cheadle, near Manchester. Archie stayed at Styles, but he wanted to marry Nancy Neal, and he asked Agatha for a divorce. At first she would not agree, but at last she said yes, and they were divorced in April 1928. Agatha Christie was hesitant to continue using her own name as the author of her books, and expressed her desire to use a different name. However, her publishers advised against it, explaining that her readers had already associated her name with her work, and a change would cause confusion. Despite her reservations, Agatha ultimately agreed to keep the name Christie as her pen name. Her publishers' advice proved to be correct, as her books continued to gain popularity among readers in England and America. Then Agatha wanted a holiday. 2 days before she left England, Agatha went to dinner with some friends. During the evening, she talked to some people who were just back from Baghdad, Iraq. Their names were Commander and Mrs. Howe. Agatha was speaking to Mrs. Howe about her plans for a holiday. She asked Mrs. Howe how to get to her desired destination, the West Indies. Howe suggested going by sea. However, Mrs. Howe also mentioned that Agatha could take the Orient Express train to Baghdad. Agatha was immediately interested in the idea and exclaimed that she had always wanted to ride on the famous train. She then decided that she would travel to Baghdad instead of the West Indies. The Howes were very helpful and wrote down the names of interesting places for Agatha to visit. It was an exciting journey for her, traveling alone for the first time. While she was staying in Baghdad, she had been intrigued by the idea of visiting ever since Commander Howe had mentioned it to her. Archaeology was something that interested Agatha very much, and Leonard Woolley, the archaeologist, and his wife were working at Catherine Woolley was very happy to meet Agatha. She became the Woolleys' special visitor. It was slow, tiring work, and they had to dig very carefully. Sometimes they found nothing for hours, and sometimes they found old pots or knives. It was always exciting when one of the workers found something that was thousands of years old. A young archaeologist called Max Malone was working with the Woolleys. He was pleased to take Agatha. He liked her immediately, and Agatha liked him. They talked and laughed, and enjoyed every minute of their time together. They met the Woolleys in Baghdad, and the four of them traveled to Greece together. But when they got to their hotel in Athens, there were 7 telegrams waiting for Agatha. They all said the same thing. Rosalind was ill. Agatha must come home quickly, so they traveled home together. When they arrived, they found that Rosalind was much better, so that was one happy ending. Agatha was 14 years older than Max, but during the journey home, Max decided to ask her an important question. And when they were back in England, he asked Agatha to marry him. They were married in Edinburgh, in Scotland. Chapter 8. Dame Agatha. For the next 25 years, Agatha went with Max on all his archaeological journeys. She loved traveling, and those were the happiest years of her life. It was a good time for writing too. And visiting these interesting places gave her ideas for some of her best books. One of the many people who enjoyed her books was Queen Mary, the mother of the King of England. One day, in 1946, Agatha had a letter from the British Broadcasting Corporation in London. They want her to write a play for Queen Mary's 80th birthday. Agatha's play for radio was called 3 Blind Mice. Later, she wrote the play again for a London theatre. In 1971, Queen Elizabeth made Agatha a Dame of the British Empire, a very high honour for a woman in Britain. Agatha Christie died on the 12th of January, 1976. During her life, she wrote 67 detective novels, 10 books of short stories, 13 plays, 6 novels that were not about crime, using the name Mary Westmacott, and 2 books about her life. Today, millions of her books, in more than 40 different languages, are still sold in every country of the world. Agatha Christie was, perhaps, the greatest detective story writer of all time, a woman of mystery, both in books and in life.